Bitcoin,
Bitcoin.
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 Well, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. I have some Bitcoin.
Bitcoin has recently pierced into the consciousness of the mainstream. We've heard everyone from the likes of Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, to Kanye West talk about it, so much so that the word today has become a part of our lexicon. And yet, despite making its recent splash in mainstream media, majority of the world still don't truly understand Bitcoin. And I don't blame them because it's a very complicated subject. It took myself a lot of reading, learning, and watching videos before I truly finally understood how powerful of an invention Bitcoin is. And when I did, it felt like I was Neo in the movie Matrix when he finally came to his own epiphany.
I know Kung Fu.
It was an out-of-body experience, just because I finally understood how revolutionary and transformational Bitcoin is going to truly be. In this video, I'm going to explain to you why I believe firmly that Bitcoin is going to reach $10 million one day. Yes, I know that most of you will think that this sounds crazy, but if you keep an open mind and watch until the end, I promise I will lay out all the facts for you and also show you how Bitcoin presents itself as one of the best risk-to-reward investment ever. So hang tight and enjoy. If you are relatively new to the space and find it really hard to gauge where Bitcoin's future lies, I totally get you because I was once there too. For the most part, even the mainstream media still does not fully grasp the transformational change that Bitcoin is going to usher in. You see, we are still very early into this Bitcoin and blockchain story. Just think of it this way, to fully understand Bitcoin, one must not know only concepts of economy, history, finance, politics, but they also have to be pretty tech savvy. So let's start with the history of money. The short and quick version of it is that for thousands of years we relied on precious metals such as gold and silver for trading. There's only so much gold we can dig up, so this in turn makes it very scarce and valuable, great for a medium of exchange. However, one of gold's big problem is that it's not very portable and convenient to lug around with you, and gold is not very divisible, so eventually we moved on to minting coins out of gold and silver. And then later on, with the help of printing technology, we moved on to paper money that was still backed by gold. And for half a century, Americans were able to trade in their paper money for gold at the bank. This was commonly referred to as the gold standard. Well, in 1971, President Nixon decided to take the dollar off the gold standard, therefore allowing the Federal Reserves to have full control over the money supply, essentially allowing them to print money out of thin air. And each time they do this, they dilute the current money supply, in other words, inflation of our money. Fast forward to today, all money is created and influenced by various governments and central banks around the world. This has become a huge problem, you see, because it only stands to enrich those who are in power, such as the government and central banks. And we have countless examples of how devastating this monetary policy has been. We see countries such as Zimbabwe, Venezuela go through hyperinflation, where their money supply has been inflated at such a high rate that it requires them to take stacks of money just to buy everyday items. Here are some examples. This is how much it takes to buy a whole chicken. How about some beef? A roll of toilet paper? Or perhaps some carrots? The housing crisis. Real estate prices across the world are skyrocketing, as rich people are using them as investment vehicles instead of homes. Largely because their wealth can be protected from fiat inflation. As a result, not only does this drive house prices way beyond their fair valuation, it also makes the rich become richer and the poor become poorer, as now they are also left out of the housing market. Take a look at this website, hilariously entitled Crack Shack or Mansion. Based on how ridiculous the house prices have become in Vancouver, Canada, upwards of almost $2 million for what most would call a regular house in North America. This housing trend was largely responsible for the famous 2008 financial crash with the subprime mortgages. And what did the governments do then? They bailed out the big bankers who were largely responsible for the crash in the first place. And once again, the feds printed out more money, diluted the money supply to help out their banker friends. The crash caused many people to lose their houses, massive layoffs from their jobs, and families torn apart. It's estimated that the average American household lost a third of its net worth during the recession from the 2008 financial crash, and has since contributed to the further rising inequality gap throughout the world. Fast forward to today, take a look at the real-time national debt counter. America is at a historic all-time high debt of $23 trillion. And the global debt is sitting at $247 trillion. And renowned economists around the world are once again predicting another crash that is going to happen within the next 2 to 5 year window. At this point, it goes without saying that the monetary policy that Nixon did by taking us off the gold standard is completely flawed, as the money supply is now controlled by governments and central banks, and is showing more and more cracks day by day. Here's where Bitcoin comes into the picture and why it matters. It rose from the ashes of the 2008 financial crisis by an anonymous person or a group of individuals by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Poetic in the way that it has surfaced, the Bitcoin white paper revealed to us a different way of governance. A new decentralized system has evolved from the concept of the peer-to-peer decentralized BitTorrent network to something that we now refer to as the blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain is a growing list of records called blocks, which are chained together using mathematics, code, and cryptography. It is open source, transparent, maintains a global record of an open ledger for everyone to see. A Bitcoin is divisible to 8 decimal places, making it infinitely scalable. There will only be 21 million Bitcoins ever minted. Therefore, for the first time in human history, something that is truly scarce that can be used as a global currency and a store of value. The network is decentralized by people around the world who run a Bitcoin full node, and it can be colluded. Therefore, we also know its monetary policy ahead of time. The network is guarded by what we call miners. Like counterpart to the traditional gold miners, they too are run by different individuals or groups around the world. They are rewarded with Bitcoins by dedicating their computer power, which in turn protects the network from hackers. In fact, the network is so secure that its estimated combined computer power used to mine Bitcoin is equivalent to the top 500 supercomputers around the world. It is virtually impossible to hack and has a 10-year ongoing track record to prove it, which is a great achievement to say the least, as it stands to be the biggest online honeypot for hackers and thieves. So hopefully now you understand a little of what makes Bitcoin so important. It is quite a lot to take in at first, which is why I firmly believe that we are barely into the first inning of this revolution. At this point of Bitcoin's existence, it is mostly misunderstood and highly underrated. In my opinion, Bitcoin is at the stage where the internet was in the early 1990s. Remember the rudimentary sounds your modem would make every time you wanted to connect to the internet? Needless to say, the internet had a lot of hurdles back then. Just like how Bitcoin is today, a lot of people used to underestimate how much the internet would develop. Fast forward to today, roughly 30 years later, we have companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Uber, and all because of the internet. It surpassed all of our wildest expectations. We do our shopping online, book vacations, find out reviews for restaurants we want to go to, hotels, search for romantic partners. Basically, the internet is ubiquitous with our daily lives today. We are still in the early days for Bitcoin, as most people are still going to take time to learn and discover just how important this technology is going to be for humanity. This is why we hear so many misconceptions such as, Bitcoin is too slow, it can't scale enough to support a global economy. It uses too much energy. It's only used by criminals. It's the MySpace of cryptos. This is a process like the internet was in the heydays. It's going to take a little bit of time for the mainstream to figure out. However, because of how interconnected we are today and how much easier information flows through technology, social media, and just the internet in general, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will mature much quicker than the internet did.
The differences between the internet and the World Wide Web. The differences between commercial online services such as the Microsoft Network, Prodigy, or America Online, and the internet. How to get connected to the web. how to use something called a web browser to navigate the web, what a web page is, and how to search, locate, and download all types of files, from information files to video and audio files.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network, the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
A cryptocurrency is a let's see, how do I do this?
Because if you can't describe it,
I know,
we're
I'm
sunk.
trying to think about the
Bitcoin, but they question it because what is it based on?
It's sort of a,
One of the joys was kind of watching Anderson try to wrap his mind around this thing.
There's no actual coin.
that is true. That is something that trips
I
people
know
up.
this is a dumb question, but
No,
I
no.
can't get past that.
It took me a little while too.
I'm so antiquated, I can't imagine things that do not have a physical component.
It's really abstract for a lot of people.
Don't patronize me.
Horse and buggy. In the early days of the earliest automobiles, people who were buying some of the early cars were being asked, why do you need the car? The horse and buggy work just fine. And those early cars were really slow. But people who wanted to have cars needed infrastructure like roads and services like gas stations in order for cars to truly take off. The same thing happened, and we know how that ended. And the same thing happened with the internet in 1995. You used to see this old school computer. Imagine, or 1994, 1995, imagine if on that day I would have told you, hey, fast forward, you're gonna have a small device in your pocket, you'll be able to download a 2-hour movie, watch it on demand, shop for groceries, interact for free with all of your friends and family, call them for free on Skype, find an apartment anywhere in the world, summon a ride on demand. You would have told me I was crazy, rightfully so, because you would have pointed out, my modem can't stay connected long enough to get out a single email. The same is true of crypto. We are in the dial-up days. And the critics out there confuse the current state of innovation with the end state of the innovation. And I think that's one of their biggest mistakes. Why would they assume the innovation would all stop right now? I mean, complaining about crypto today, one journalist said, and complaining about how slow and how it works today is like complaining in 1994 that the internet didn't have Netflix.
So let's talk about the big figures in media today that is staunchly against Bitcoin. Let's start with Warren Buffett. The world's third richest man has gone on countless media rants calling Bitcoin everything from rat poison squared to how it's only for charlatans.
About 5 years ago, we asked Charlie Munger, we were sitting right there, what he thought of Bitcoin, and he said, rat poison. Back then it was about $100+ per Bitcoin. Today it's 9,000. Is it still rat poison?
Well, probably rat poison squared.
Upon a quick Google search, we find out that Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, has over 40% of their portfolio in legacy financial banks. Not to mention, he's also overlooked Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla in the past. Next on the list, Congressman Brad Sherman. He's attempted to call for a bill to ban all cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. Considering how much Wall Street and Silicon Valley has invested into this industry, his attempt is naive at best.
I look for colleagues to join with me in introducing a bill to outlaw cryptocurrency purchases by Americans so that we nip this in the bud.
A further look into Mr. Sherman's background, we quickly find out that his largest campaign donors come from, you guessed it, big banks. Finally, the infamous CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, who's had constantly gone out of his way to trash Bitcoin, calling it a fraud to a vehicle for criminals.
I could care less about Bitcoin. I don't know why I said anything about it. If you're a criminal, great product. I mean that.
One of the more obvious ones, Jamie Dimon is the CEO of the biggest of the big four banks and formerly a board of director of the Federal Reserve Bank. What we can learn from this is that these guys from the old financial world stands to have a lot to lose as Bitcoin continuously creeps into the mainstream, Remember, these guys are not dumb, they are masters of public relations. Asking these guys what they think about Bitcoin would be like asking a taxi driver his view on Uber, or Blockbuster's opinion on Netflix. Now let's flip the tables around and see what the smartest minds around the world are saying about Bitcoin.
You believe that Bitcoin is going to be the world's single currency, or you hope that it is going to be the world's single currency.
And I think we've seen massive value creation.
Blockchain got recognized because of Bitcoin. It was a fundamental technology for Bitcoin. What an incredible thing Bitcoin is. It's still here working after I don't know how many years it's been, and it hasn't need to be changed, and it's not owned or controlled by any company. So
just let me tell you where I'm at with money right now because of Bitcoin. I've been a gold bug, like I said, since '72, and the way I see the world today with Bitcoin is that there's three kinds of money. There's God's money, which is gold and silver, again, atomic number 79 and 47. Then there's government money called fiat money or currencies, which is the dollar, the euro, the yen, the peso. And the third type of money now is cyber money, which Bitcoin and Ethereum and those guys are the most famous. It's really about what's real. You know, is money fake or is it real? And I think, so the choice, when I talk to people, I said, what do you think will be here in 2040, approximately 22 years from now? Will gold still be here? Well, it's been here since eternity. Will the dollar be here?
Right.
I don't think so. And will blockchain be here? I think so. So that's really the way I look at the world of money and currencies, is what's going to be here in 22 years.
So back to the internet, I believe the internet will have a native currency.
Really?
It'll have a native currency, and I don't know if it's Bitcoin. I think it will, because just given all the tests it's been through and the principles behind it, how it was created, and it was something that was born on the internet, that was developed on the internet, that was tested on the internet. It is of the internet.
Well, Bitcoin is exciting because it shows how cheap it can be. Bitcoin is better than currency in that you don't have to be physically in the same place, and of course for large transactions currency can get pretty inconvenient. The Bitcoin technology is key, and you could add to it or you could build a similar technology where there's enough attribution that people feel comfortable. This has nothing to do with terrorism or any type of money laundering.
What excites you right now? What can you look at in the world today that you feel like, wow, that is a good idea, or that is really where the growth story is?
I think there are these pockets in biotech that I find like that. You know, the one other one that I've been looking at a lot more have been the cryptocurrencies, and while I'm skeptical of most of them, I do think people are a little bit are maybe underestimating Bitcoin. It's like a reserve form of money. It's like gold, and it's just a store of value. You don't actually need to use it to make payments. And it's been, there's about $70 billion worth of Bitcoin in the world. There's $9 trillion worth of gold, and if Bitcoin ends up being the cyber equivalent of gold, it has a great potential that's very underestimated. That's very underestimated. That's very underestimated.
Well, people question it, and I know there's been so much debate about Bitcoin, but they question it because what is it based on? I mean, you see that the dollar is based on, the trust of the Treasury, the trust of the U.S. government. What is Bitcoin based on?
Well, the argument it's based on the security of the math, which tells you that it can never be diluted by a government. It can't be hacked, and it's a form of money that's absolutely that's secure in an absolute way. It's hard to mine. It's actually harder to mine than gold, and so in that sense, it's more constrained.
Because there's a finite amount that are going to be made.
Yeah.
Right. There's 21.9 million Bitcoins that are going to be made, and if enough people hold and don't sell, and enough people borrow to buy, just like we saw in the stock market, because look. And so, so there's scarcity. So it's point being scarcity sells.
Yes, right.
And there's no greater defined scarcity than Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Do you own any of the? Okay.
Yes.
Right now, it is believed that the total money supply of all fiat currencies around the world is somewhere around $80 trillion. if you consider M1, M2, M3, if you add them all up around the world. And I strongly believe that that number is artificially diluted and artificially kept small, because essentially by continuously printing, governments are disincentivizing the world and disincentivizing investors and even average people to store too much money in currency.
And they're doing this because if I take $100 and I put it in my bank account, as they print money, that $100 loses purchasing power every single year.
For sure. I mean, every single day where the money creation occurs, see, it's interesting because the cost of creating that money for the government is near zero. All it takes is just a push of a button, right? But essentially, every single unit of fiat currency that gets created reduces the wealth of the fiat holder around the world. And Bitcoin is an unimaginably new phenomena where, for the first time, nobody can seize your wealth. Not just directly, like they did with gold in the 30s, but just like they do with stealth inflation in fiat. Nobody can print more. And for the first time, you have this currency that you can have full, or at least very strong confidence that for the rest of your life, the percentage of the money supply of this entire system will always remain the same, which really is completely unprecedented, because even with gold, you don't have that. This current system, because the money is constantly getting diluted, people like surgeons, artisans, dentists, etc., engineers, they either have to play part-time investors on the side, or they have to sort of outsource those services to registered investment advisors and brokers, etc. And that's part of the reason why the financial system is much bigger than it has to be, why Wall Street is just a ginormous part of the world's economy. If we had something like gold, or better yet Bitcoin, then you could save your wealth and it would actually gain a little bit of purchasing power every year without having to sort of have this anxiety-riddled wave of activities that you need to do. And it's actually quite crazy how in today, I'm not even talking about the second or third world where this isn't even an option, even in the first developed civilized Western world, you have to create a diversified portfolio of equities, bonds, small caps, munis, commodities, FX, derivatives sometimes, etc., just to preserve your wealth. When all is said and done, Bitcoin will be the second or the third single biggest asset class, the single biggest asset in the world. Maybe real estate.
Here's the way I look at it. There is about $100 trillion worth of fiat currency out there. Okay. Fiat currency is poor currency. It's tied to political whims. It's tied to political parties. Bureaucrats control it. It's not really that good for you. And all of the new, best, brightest engineers are working on cryptocurrencies. And so my belief is that over some period of time, and I don't want to go into it in too great of depth, but over some period of time, the cryptocurrencies will eclipse the fiat currencies. So we're looking at about 1,000 times on what we've got now.
So let's talk about some of the catalysts that's really going to drive Bitcoin to the millions and eventually to the end game of $10 million per Bitcoin. First and foremost, the global debt right now is sitting at $247 trillion. This is obviously unsustainable, and as governments and central banks continually to enrich themselves and devalue the purchasing power for everyone else, people will start to learn about the monetary system, especially in today's age where information is widely available. Second, as more and more corrupt governments around the world start to steal wealth from their citizens through the printing of money, countries like Turkey, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and most recently and probably still in everyone's mind, Venezuela, we are starting to see their citizens adopt Bitcoin at an alarming rate, even if it means going against a ban that their countries have made against Bitcoin. Due to how widespread technology is now, people are using their smartphones to trade and even setting up computers to mine Bitcoin. Third, Wall Street and the big institutions. In the last 2 to 3 years, we have started to see some of the biggest, most powerful financial giants in America setting up on-ramps for the future of Bitcoin. Fidelity, one of the largest asset managers in the world with approximately $7 trillion in total customer assets, have announced that they are starting a crypto exchange and that they are actively already mining Bitcoin and Ethereum. TD Ameritrade, with an astonishing 11.5 million client accounts and assets over $1.3 trillion, have just launched a cryptocurrency trading platform. The Canadian Pension Plan Board, with over $328 billion in assets, are looking into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The Yale Endowment, David Swensen, perhaps one of the most revered and respected trend-setting investor in the world, has recently declared their first $400 million fund into Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The New York Stock Exchange, the world's largest exchange with a market cap of $30 trillion, has announced that they will soon launch their backed Bitcoin cryptocurrency exchange. Keep in mind that these are some of the biggest financial players in the world who have only recently started to declare that they are building the on-ramp for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Fourth, the big businesses. They are starting to make their moves too. Facebook is launching their own cryptocurrency that is set to come out in 2020. Furthermore, Mark Zuckerberg has held talk with his longtime rivals, the Winklevoss twins. This is all in an effort to help push forth their new Facebook crypto. Could this be another repeat in history? Remember when longtime rivals Steve Jobs and Bill Gates finally put aside their differences and came together to help each other achieve mass adoption with Windows and Apple? Most people underestimate this move, but one just has to remember how Facebook is the world's social network and has a reach beyond most people's imagination, introducing their billions of users throughout their ecosystem of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Oculus is going to be absolutely huge. Samsung, the world's second biggest smartphone manufacturer, has released a Bitcoin and crypto wallet native to their flagship smartphone line. And in a few years, it is my strong belief that every phone will come equipped with a Bitcoin wallet. And then we have companies who are starting to accept Bitcoin as payment, especially beneficial for them as an alternative to the high fees that credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard shave off each transaction. For example, here are some of the big names. They include Microsoft, Starbucks, Whole Foods, KFC, Shopify, Wikipedia, and this list is going to expand year by year until every business will eventually start offering payments in Bitcoin and other cryptos to avoid the third-party rent seekers such as Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, who take a cut out of every transaction that's no longer required. Finally, perhaps the biggest catalyst of all is demographics. As the baby boomer generations are starting to get into their retirement stage and dropping out of the workforce, millennials are starting to rise up. Within the next 10 years or so, they are coming to the stage of their lives where they are building up their career and earning money, and saving up for a house, a vacation, their kids' college fund, or a retirement. This is the generation that grew up in the digital era, playing video games such as Super Mario, World of Warcraft, League of Legends, Fortnite, and what have you. And the idea of a digital currency like Bitcoin is second nature to them. In addition, millennials also happens to be the generation that witnessed the impact that the 2008 financial crisis had on their parents and the rest of the world, and are all too well familiar with the growing fiat hyperinflation that's happening around them. So naturally, they grew up with a healthy distrust of governments and banks. And this demographic is maturing to becoming the biggest generation with wealth. So put that into perspective.
I've been doing research and I've worked at various firms. I started off at Kidder Peabody, then Solomon Brothers, then JP Morgan. Blockchain is a millennial story. And I'll explain why I think that if millennials adopt this the way we think they are, this is not the internet bubble. This is a lot more like emerging markets becoming an asset class. I think that's really the appropriate analog. This is very largely a millennial phenomenon. So we have to keep in mind that the generation that is going to drive this asset as an asset class isn't really us and the people in the audience. It's really going to be our kids or those who are millennials today. Well, what are millennials going to be doing in the next 30 years? Okay, something you can see a mile away. I have a population tree here, and I've lined up each of the generations. The millennials are now just entering two critical periods, the home buying years and their investing years. So let's think about housing. I've lined up each generation when they were aged 21 to 35, and I colored each. The red is silent, the boomers are light blue, Gen X is gray, and the millennials are blue, dark blue. Housing starts have peaked with every generation's peak cohort size. This tells us housing is going to likely boom through 2030. So stay long housing, I guess, right? It's really bullish. But let's talk about investment years. Savings flow, okay, so the investment pool of prime income age earners is running about $1 trillion a year today. Okay, so every year there's $1 trillion that the people aged 35 to 60 allocate. And today, it's dominated by boomers and Gen X. But the millennials are now just entering these prime income years. So what did the silent generation do when they dominated the prime savings flow? They actually bought gold. Gold was $40 when we went off the gold standard in 1971. That was the first time individuals could buy gold. And when the silent generation cohort peaked, gold was $600, a 15x in a decade, just by a single generation buying gold. The boomers, we know, bought equities. What was the first year the boomers turned age 35? 1982. That shaded blue area is their first boomers to the peak size of the cohort, 1982 to 99. Coincidence? That was essentially the stock market boom. And the question is, well, what about the Gen X, which was a smaller cohort? As you can see in the middle period, the stock market didn't go anywhere. Gen X wasn't big enough to actually power the stock market higher. But here we think the millennials are going to drive equities. They like growth stocks, so we think it's going to power a stock market boom through 2038. Gen X liked hedge funds, and you can see that's essentially peaked with Gen X. But here's what I think millennials are going to do. Now remember, millennials are going to soon have $1 trillion of savings flow. Bitcoin's rise in 2016 coincides with the first millennials entering their prime savings years. Today, crypto, for every $1 billion that goes into crypto, it's turning into roughly $25 billion of price appreciation. If millennials put 10% of their savings flow, $100 billion, into crypto, that's a $2.5 trillion rise per year. And crypto is roughly a $500 trillion market cap. So we think that you may end up seeing Bitcoin by the end of the cycle as high as $10 million per Bitcoin.
Some highly intelligent financial analysts, especially the younger generation, are estimating that Bitcoin has roughly 2,000% gain from today's price to its maturity. This is what makes the risk to reward ratio so great for Bitcoin, because it's not like you have to put in a lot of money to see a high gain in the future. You don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin, which is a common misconception. You can just invest a small amount, something that you're comfortable with, and just secure it and forget about it for a few years. For example, a $500 investment today could end up being $10,000 in a few years. That's with a 2,000% gain. One thing you have to remember is that because this is a new revolutionary asset class, it means we are still early in the adopter discovery phase. And therefore, volatility comes with the territory. As Bitcoin's market cap gets bigger and bigger, more people understand Bitcoin, there will be less speculation, and in turn the volatility will even out. So if you are invested right now, or you're planning to be investing soon, you have to have a strong fundamental understanding of how Bitcoin is going to change the world. Otherwise, you might just end up ultimately selling before catching up the ride to the biggest mass adoption phase of this technology.
If you believe the current system that we have is meeting the needs of the world's disenfranchised and unbanked, then you can probably go ahead and dismiss cryptocurrency. But if you believe that it would add value to the global economy to get cheap, fast, and easy access for 2 billion people in the world, then cryptocurrency is something that you ought to pay attention to.
And little by little, as I traveled around the world and I got to meet people, everybody had a story. And it usually started with something like, I have this problem, or we face this problem, or we had to endure this. I remember the first time I went to Argentina, I had a chance to meet an older gentleman, and he told me a story about the many monetary collapses he had to endure. And he showed me where he buried his silver after the government's money went bad. Then he told me about how the police showed up and stole his silver. So then he went to his backyard and showed me where he buried his other silver, because the first was a decoy cache. That's how clever these people get. But that's the reality that people live in Venezuela, reality they live in Zimbabwe. And after 2008, it made me think, how far are we in the United States away from that? We have 23 trillion in debt. Our leadership continues to get more and more incompetent. The global financial markets are not healthy. A few key facts to remember. Our movement continues to grow. It's easy to get a little hopeless and think that the best times are gone, but there's actually more people in cryptocurrency today in 2019 than there were at the peak of the market in 2017. More businesses being started today, more venture capital entering the space, more diverse capital entering the space, stronger business models. Recently, Samsung just announced that apparently crypto's coming to their phones. 3 to 5 years, that's going to be a standard for pretty much every smartphone, probably including the iPhone. And all these major consumer platforms, from Messenger to Windows itself, are prime candidates to integrate infrastructure. So our movement is growing.
You'd see that kind of volatility, but I think it's going to level out once the futures contract picks up steam, once options are in on, and then there's other products like ETFs and whatnot. I think you're just going to start to see it like level out and look a little bit boring. But the interesting thing is like the opportunities now. When it's volatile, when it's small, when it's risky, that's your opportunity to make money. When there's a high risk, there's a high reward. When it gets boring and stable and kind of caps out at a couple trillion dollar market cap, there's really not much more room to go unless big.
I was talking to one of my 60-year-old friends, Stan Druckenmiller, who's maybe the world's greatest speculator. And I'm only 53, and I was like, Stan, you're old. Because he was like, well, Bitcoin, gold, you can feel gold. But I was talking about my daughter. I said, if I give my mother digital flowers for Mother's Day, my mother will look at me and maybe slap me. And I'll hear a whole bunch of curse words coming at her. And, but if my daughter gets digital flowers from her boyfriend, she's like, oh, he loves me. Our youth are growing up in a world that's digital. You go to China, no one carries cash, right? It's all electronic payments. And so as we shift into becoming more immersed in a digital world, the idea of a digital store of value, the idea of digital gold makes a whole lot more sense. It doesn't for most of the guys in this room with bald heads. I see a lot of bald heads out there because we didn't grow up immersed in our phones.
There's a generational shift that's happening in the way that investors think about gold. So the younger generation, I grew up, I was born after the gold standard, didn't grow up during a period of war where you had to be able to store your money via something like gold. Younger generation, money is digital. Anybody who has a phone can now access this new asset class. And so you have what is approximate $68 trillion of wealth, $68 trillion of wealth, $68 trillion of wealth being handed down from boomers to X's and Y's and millennials over the next 25 years. That's not going to stay in gold.
You have actual investors that you're advising. Would you ever put them in a Bitcoin ETF?
Well, it's interesting. When we talk to our younger clients, we have a core gold allocation in our portfolios, and they'll ask about that and say, well, what about crypto? And if you talk to primarily millennials and ask them which they prefer, Bitcoin or gold, it's a landslide. It's not even close. It's like 90%. It's like 90%. It's like 90% prefer Bitcoin.
And as you can see, the headline reads 20% of young Americans own Bitcoin, report says.
No. When I made that stupid statement, which got all the thing I called it fraud, my daughter sent me an email saying, Dad, I own 2 Bitcoins.
Do you know who Satoshi Nakamoto is?
I know this one. So it was the anonymous person that made Bitcoin.
It's kind of like a futuristic item, you know what I mean? I think it's viable. I don't know. Like, I feel like people are gravitating more towards it.
Do you know what a Bitcoin is?
Yeah, every time I get on the Cash App, they say I can do the Cash App with a Bitcoin. And my girlfriend, she's been trying to learn more about Bitcoin because she wants to invest and stuff.
Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and then there's Ethereum.
Litecoin.
So is it kind of like the fear of change? People are just scared because it's new and like you can't touch it?
Yeah, it could potentially, you know, upset the traditional banking traditions and things like that because you don't actually need a bank
Got it, okay.
to use it or exchange it.
That's a bit scary but exciting.
Oh, cool.
What do you think is the future of Bitcoin?
The future is the fact that you don't have to work too hard for your money. You have access to your money in an account.
What do you know about Bitcoin?
Bitcoin, I know the digital currency. I know there's like a possible future that will be taking over like the currency used today. I know a lot of countries actually adopting it. But I've invested a small amount and I'm going to leave it in there for like years to come.
Yeah.
You know,
What do you think is the future of Bitcoin?
There's not going to be any more cash. It's going to be all about Bitcoin.
You think Bitcoin's going to take over?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
I think it's on the way. It's on the come up. I mean, it's kind of low key right now. Not a bunch of people know about it, but I think it's on the way up to be one of the bigger apps of the world. Like, it's on the way up.
This college?
No, I'm a senior in high school.
They're talking about Bitcoin in high school, and is this right?
Yeah, my economics class.
And what school do you go to?
I go to Parkview High School.
Parkview High School?
Yeah.
This is good. This is props for Parkview High School.
In the next 10 years, it's going to be huge. It's going to blow up everywhere, you know?
Do you think you'll be able to spend Bitcoin at Starbucks one day?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
Yeah. It's the future.
Then you come up with a number of about $2 to $5 million per Bitcoin.
We just wrote a piece that we believe that Bitcoin is going to go to 10 million.
$10 million per Bitcoin price in today's terms, without even counting the sort of the inevitable hyperinflation of fiat currencies. And so this is my reasoning.
So you think that a single Bitcoin will be worth $10 million
in today's money?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do.
Going to the next stage, which will be the solution to the world debt problem. Then we will go to $10 million.
A single Bitcoin will be worth $10 million in today's terms for one Bitcoin. That will be a $160 trillion market cap or network value, a 2,000x increase between now and our death.
So we think that you may end up seeing Bitcoin by the end of the cycle as high as $10 million per Bitcoin. $10 million per Bitcoin. $10 million per Bitcoin.
The beautiful and amazing thing about Bitcoin is that not only is this technology going to be transformational to the world, it's going to liberate people from governments and banks who's had control over the money supply and the ability to fund wars through the printing of money and diluting the purchasing power of everyone else through inflation. But Bitcoin is also going to really reward those who have an early fundamental understanding of its peaceful revolution. We no longer need to rely on governments or banks to control the supply of money, and instead put the faith into mathematics, cryptography, and computers. In a funny way, if you really think about it, Bitcoin's combination of being deflationary, only 21 million Bitcoins ever will be made, decentralized, digital, uncensorable, unseizable, transparent, peer-to-peer, is really a first of its kind ever in human history, making it really a get-rich scheme and a revolution built into one. I hope you guys are just as excited about this new digital revolution as I am. If so, please hit the like, subscribe button. Also be sure to share and retweet this video to your friends and family to ensure that the newcomers into the space have the tools and knowledge to accelerate this inevitable future of Bitcoin and blockchain. The decentralized revolution has only just begun. We are all stakeholders in this ecosystem. I love you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace.